Do you love me?
Okay.
So this is the love of my life, Peter Medak. I met him in Hollywood, as you do.
No, we met in New York.
Did we meet
At my cousin's dinner.
It was actually in London, here.
Yes, it was.
It was in London. And it was love at first sight, although he has a lot of women in his life, and unfortunately, I come very low down on his pecking order. Anyway, in any case, he's one of the world's leading film directors of a certain age.
Leading somewhere.
Yes, and he's just finished a film on Peter Sellers.
Right.
He's probably most famous for Ruling Class or The Craze, depending on what type of film you like. But in any case, Peter, I want you, because this is the story I most prefer about you, is your escape from Hungary, which is just the most amazing story.
Yeah, it was 1944, Saturday, and we were having lunch at home in Budapest, and my father, who was in the textile business, I had my brother, my father, and my mother, the four of us, and the maid poured the soup out, and she went back to the kitchen and he said to my father, "You got to come and look, because they're collecting all the Jewish people in the building opposite." And my father, we all went to the kitchen. I was 7 years old then, and I saw at gunpoint the Hungarian, they were called the arrow crosses, which was like the SS, but the Hungarian version of it. And they were 100 times worse than the Germans were, collecting all the Jews, at gunpoint. And my father said, "We got to leave right now." So we got up, came down this beautiful building, which is like a Viennese-looking building with marble steps.
And we actually went to it together,
yes,
didn't we?
Yes, that's right. And as we come to the front door, I saw through those enormous glass doors a lot of shouting in the street, and a man running for his life. 2 seconds later, the Hungarian SS arrow crosses were chasing him at gunpoint, and there's gunshots, and my father says, "Whatever you do, you mustn't look." So we go out, turn right, and we go past the dead, bleeding body of the person they just killed. And we get to the street corner, and in the middle of the street, which was a crossroad, the Germans were checking it was called the Schutzpass.
Yes.
And the Schutzpass was given by Raoul Wallenberg, who was the Swedish ambassador to Hungary, who saved thousands and thousands of Jews with this paper, which was like a free passage. So they were checking their papers, and we somehow got away and crossed the road. But when we were crossing the road, I could see the vans loaded up with the Jewish people they just collected, driving this way, and we got away. And then we hid next to the Gestapo in the country. In my mind, it was for years, but then in reality, it was from June till January 1945.
And you lived under the SS, didn't you?
Well, we were hiding next door to them in the basement, And by hiding meant that we had to take up a different identity, and I had to change my name to Pete, from Peter to something else. And we had to go to the church every Sunday and just pretend to be Christians, but hiding there. And my father was arrested several times, but he kept escaping and turning up. And my aunt, Lotte, who was this very famous soprano who lived in Albert Court,
yes,
when I came to London in 1956, used to come in and out to Hungary bringing food to us and stuff like that while we were hiding. Great thing about the soup bowl is that when the war was over and this little village has been taken over 2 or 3 times by the Germans, and then we went back to Budapest as they say in Hungary, and went into an apartment building, and the wall was completely blown, destroyed by a bomb, one of the buildings, and you could see out to the building where the Jews were being taken away. And then when I went into the dining room, I couldn't believe it, because on the table were the 4 soup plates still with the dried soup, with all the rubble which fell in from the thing, And I was this big, you know, I'm looking at this table and I said, this is impossible. I mean, the whole world turned upside down and the war ended and there were these 4 soup plates, you know, it was ridiculous, you know, so that's the story of the
I
soup
love the
plate.
soup. I love the soup plates.
But then the incredible street about that street corner, when I decided to escape during the revolution from Budapest, with my friend Peter Barkonyi, who lived in the 2nd floor, who was an actor, we came out the building at 6 in the morning. There was a curfew, and they would kill anybody if you're not supposed to be in the street. There were 3 Russian tanks in the street. And when we came out the front door, me and Peter, the turret of the thing followed us from the front door to that street corner over there, which was the same street corner which was in 1944,
so
except in 44 we went that way, and in 56 we turned this way. And I said to all my kids when I had them back in Hungary, and I said, had I not turned left on this corner, I said, you wouldn't be here today.
Because we went back there, didn't we?
Yeah.
We went back to your house, about 3 years ago.
Sure.
And I went, and he said, don't knock, nobody. He said, don't knock on the door, because nobody will be in. So I said, no, I'm going to knock on the door. So I knocked on pressed all the buttons, and eventually somebody opened the button. And we went in, and it was one of your oldest friends who was still living in the building.
That's right.
And they were so happy to see you.
He's a cousin of this friend of mine.
That was such a funny moment. So anyway, you got to England. Eventually you got to England, didn't you? What made you go into the film world? Because,
well,
you know, you had...
it's because the same aunt of mine, who was this wonderful opera singer, for my 8th birthday came back to Hungary and gave me a 35mm hand-cranked film projector, 35mm, and a piece of film from the Hungarian studio.
Okay.
Partially it was Dad getting this present, you know, and then partially because my friend Peter, who I escaped with, was this brilliant actor. And I always was at the theater waiting for him in the evening, or a few times he made movies in Hungary during communism, and I was following the cables to try to find where they were shooting, you know. Luckily, grew up with it. When I wasn't allowed to go to school after age 13 because my father was imprisoned by the Russians, and we were so-called capitalists, which we weren't, you know, but they tried to destroy the middle classes and reduce them to the level of the working classes, you know. I wasn't fit to be educated, so I never went to school. And it was a terrible handicap in my mind. But then I was telling Camberbash last night, you know, that I could never catch up with the books and reading, because once you miss that first 16 years or 20 years of education, you know, it's impossible to catch up, you know.
Absolutely.
Benedict was amazed about it, and I want to make another film, a documentary about me arriving to England in 1956, and what it was like and how incredible Britain and the British were, you know, towards this 50,000 Hungarians who came to London or to England in a matter of 2 weeks. And it was me plus 2 other cousins of mine, you know, who came to England. It's 7 years after the Second World War ended, and what England was like, and it was the last few seconds of the good old days of England.
Yes.
And within 1 second, the minute I got to England, my aunt came and picked me up at the refugee camp, as a military camp in Tidworth. You know, immediately I'm in Carrington House in Hertford Street, which is in Shepherd's Market in the heart of London. And in the first week, my aunt said, I had nothing, because we all escaped without, I mean, money's been not worth anything. But my aunt said, I got to take you to Simpson's and buy you a dinner jacket, because you got to come with us to the English Opera Ball at Grosvenor House. So I went. I couldn't even speak English, you know, and I went with her because she was working with Benjamin Britten on Turn of the Screw. And David Hemmings was the little boy in that opera.
Absolutely.
You know, when he was 7 years old. So I went, you know, and that evening I ended up dancing with Princess Margaret, you know, in my dinner jacket, which I bought.
So from a refugee camp, you end up with Princess Margaret.
But then, ironically, there is Georgina Simpson, and here is my dinner jacket, you know, which was the first piece of clothing I ever got.
Amazing story. When you started in film, who did you work for and what jobs did you have?
My very first job was at the Associated British Pathé, because after 1 week my aunt said, okay, so I got to introduce you to this international lawyer, André Busserményi, who was Hungarian, whose office was in Shepherd's Market. And then this American executive who ran Warner Brothers in London, which was called Associated British Picture Corporation. So I went to see, he's got this letter from my lawyer, my Hungarian lawyer acquaintance, and he called up immediately. It was incredible. I mean, his big CJ letter was the head of the Variety Club at the time. He said, look, it's going to take me a couple of weeks, and you have to join the union. And so I became an apprentice at that thing. And because the only thing I learned in Hungary is when I couldn't go to school, I studied photography. And it opened my vision. And there was this one particular photographer called Béla Kálmán,
When you started making films, what was your first film that you made?
In Glebe Place, a commercial studio, a photographer, and his name was Keith Hewitt. And he was the first person in London who started doing commercials. And so so he said to me after 1 week, he said, come, I'll show you London from above. And he took me to Biggin Hill Airport, where he had a Cessna plane. It was the height of the petrol prices.
And he took you off?
Get me in the plane, and off we went to London. Was showing, he said, there's Mayfair, there's this, there's the Parliament and all that. But then he said, take any of the cameras from the studio and take some short ends and just go and shoot. So the first frames was me wandering around Parliament Square and the Big Ben and stuff, all the corny, wonderful photographs of London. But the very first movie I did was for Paramount here in London. And I found this little book called Negatives, and I had this unknown English actress who was very known on the stage, which was Glenda Jackson. So we both made our very first movie together.
And how was that received? That was received very well, though, wasn't it?
It was incredible, and it was the same time, when Antonioni's Glow Up came out. So we were running neck and neck, and it's great. I mean, it started my whole life, and if you really want to do something, you just do it,
And when you did Ruling Class, that was like a breakthrough movie.
But it was because of breaking into musical numbers,
yes, exactly.
Which nobody actually did before. But it came from this wonderful play, which Peter Barnes wrote, and already those numbers were in the play, but it was fantastic. And Peter O'Toole, we were great friends. We were going to do another movie earlier, and we both walked out of that. That was the first movie I ever walked out in my life.
But you've had a lot of drama with actors. I mean, I loved seeing your latest film about Peter Sellers, but Peter O'Toole, you love impossible people, really, because
all great actors are impossible, and later on, of course, I had the luck and the joy to work with Gary Oldman. Gary is the easiest person, and the easiest other person was Alan Bates, who I worked with, But all actors are difficult, because they are creating magic in a way, and they take a role and they become that part, and that there's a certain price to pay with that,
I loved your diary that you've written help and
I know.
disenchantment and dilettante. And where do you get dilettante from? Why were you thought to be a dilettante? Why did Peter say you were a dilettante? He was very critical.
I know, but he still was brilliant. That's what I say at the end of, that it was still worse to be there for 1 second and work with him and work with Spike, who they were completely different because Spike really had a heart, Peter was completely heartless, We ended up not talking to each other, of course, but then a couple of years later, and that's why, it was very sad when he died, because he had died several times before, particularly one time when he was doing the party or around that time. He had like 14 strokes and heart attacks, and it was a miracle he was alive. And that's why when he actually died, it was very sad, because he cheated death all his life and got away with it, you know. And then suddenly he drops dead. He said, it's not on.
But you've had a very anxious and emotional private life too, so you've taken it into your films. At the time of doing one film, your wife is committed suicide. I don't know how you carried on working. On Ruling Class, exactly. I don't know how you carried on working, because this sort of thing would usually affect most people.
It does, but it did affect me, and it still affects me forever, you know, because those things don't go away. But you learn to cope with things, you know, and as long as, I don't know, I guess, I mean, when I have to do something impossible, which I had to do several times privately, I always thought, just think you're making a movie.
I loved your image of your brother who died when he was young, and you said he came back.
I'm always walking a borderline on disasters, and when things are really bad, something good happens. But out of the blue, I did this wonderful film called The Changeling, which is a very clean supernatural ghost story with George C. Scott, who was an absolute giant at the time and all that. Johnny thinks and thought that The Changeling, not just him, but Scorsese and Spielberg, they all have their own prints of this film, 35 mil copies. And Martin always mentioned it in the 6 great movies. Well, always had The Changeling, The Changeling. So Johnny's book was a supernatural, wonderful book called Innamorata. So that's how we met, you know. And on the first day, I went to see him about 2 o'clock in the afternoon in his office in Los Angeles. And at 10 o'clock we were still together talking. And I started talking about my brother. And when my brother died, he had leukemia, and felt responsible for his death in a way which I was not, but in my mind I was.
But you were only playing with him like little boys play.
Well, exactly, you know. But,
you know, how can you say that somebody's going to die because you're playing with
them? I know, but it did hit his side, and because of that he started internal bleeding, and next morning he was dead.
Yeah.
So when you are 14 years old, kid,
it's very terrifying.
I mean, how do you get it out of your head? So I was telling Johnny, you know, that after my brother died, 2-3 months later, I was in my living room, and I was reading these wonderful books by Upton Sinclair called Lenny Budd. And I fell asleep, and it was summer, and the shutters are down like in Paris, and it's pushed out so the air can come in. And so while I was asleep, I was dreaming that there's a white pigeon who flew in and is staring at me. And at that second, I woke up. And I looked, and there in the windowsill of the thing with the shutters out was this white pigeon looking at me. And from that point on, I was convinced that that's my brother, reincarnated, okay? So now I'm telling this story to Johnny, and Johnny goes white. He said, have you ever seen the paper cover of Innamorata? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, can you give me a copy of the book? They brought the book in, he turned it round, and the back of it was the white pigeon again.
Fantastic
you know,
yes.
And it was a very integral part of the plot, this white pigeon, which leads the main character to where the supernatural whatever in the book, you know. Of course we never made the movie, but Johnny and I become like Gary Oldman, lifelong friends. And when you're working together, if the material is good enough and it's important enough, you are really walking in each other's souls, you know. And once you experience that, nothing can come between you. I mean,
exactly.
You cannot see each other for 10 years at the time, but when you do, it's back where you started.
Exactly. And so tell me about, as Gary's going to win the Oscar.
He's going to win the Oscar.
Well, anyway, if he does or he doesn't win, your portrayal of Gary in your film.
Yeah.
Okay. Explain. Yes. Explain the whole film.
What, Romeo's Bleeding?
Yes. What year is Romeo's Bleeding?
You know, at 1902 or something. I'm not sure anymore. Gary and I met I was filming in Montreal something, And Gary was shooting a film in Montreal. And I went to a party, and I loved Gary ever since Prick Up Your Ear and
Yes.
all that. I mean, who didn't, you know? And there was this bar inside, it was in the summer, and there was Gary leaning over the bar, being alone. There was 200 people outside, but nobody inside. So I went up and we started talking, you know. And by the end of the conversation, Gary said, you know, God, you know, we got to do this movie together. And that was J.P. Donleavy's book, you know, Ginger Man. Gary and I knew each other, and he came to LA, and I was going crazy, you know, and I said, I can't find a good script, and I don't know what to do, and all that. I'm going on about those good scripts, and then he said, look, I was just given this script, why don't you read it? He said, I couldn't figure it out, but I said, why don't you read it? If you like it, let's do it, you know? And that was Romeo's Bleeding.
Oh, yes.
So that's how we met, and you know, by then we'd kind of we knew each other, you know, and it was just heaven working together.
Yes.
So I love Gary, and
Yes.
we love him forever. You
Yes.
know, because he's.
But you have many friends in the film
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah,
how
because
do you
if you've
think
been directing
yes.
50 years, you know, you collect all this world, you know, and it what keeps me alive, you know, because I don't know anything else except how to direct.
So tell me how your women in your life have influenced you. I mean, you love women, don't you?
Well, I love women. I first fell in love in Hungary, but who didn't when you were young, you know, and I was 14 with this wonderful Austrian lady, girl, Heidi Braun, her name was, and she lives in Trieste today, and
Have you ever seen her again?
yes, I have, but I was desperately, we were going to run away from Hungary into the world, and all those childish, dreamlike things. At that age, I was very shy at the time, you know, and I barely kissed her and all that, and I lost her to one of my friends,
As you do.
called Pierre, who, because I was studying photography at the time, and he wanted to become like me. So that was my first love, and then I escaped out of Hungary, and the second day in Vienna, I bumped into her in Vienna with her family, and everybody was getting out of Hungary during the revolution. Then, so that was a very important, because that's the first love, and she was very beautiful, blonde, and she had this curl in her hair. And I have a photograph of her at one of my desks. And I lost them for a long time. I saw them in London, and she came with her husband-to-be, and I lost them. And one night I came back to LA, and I was a little bit drunk, and I got onto the computer, and I put in her name and his name, which was Gilberto and Heidi Benvenuti. And suddenly this incredible hotel in Trieste comes up, which is like in Venice, in the main square, but a miniature version of it. I sent them an email immediately, and next morning I woke up. They said, it's brilliant. We knew everything about you because of Julia, because we followed her career, and we knew about whatever.
And talking about Julia, you helped her a lot, didn't you, in when you were involved with the opera?
Well, I directed her several times. I mean, no, she had me. I mean,
You better say her name. I helped Julia.
Julia Migenes, you
Migenes.
know, and she was a wonderful soprano who made the film with Placido Carmen. She was a very famous singer at the Met and all that. And I was doing some television, and I needed an opera singer who could act. And then I looked through the camera, I fell in love with her. But it's my story of my life.
But it was her hair.
Huh?
She's got fabulous hair, hasn't she?
Fantastic, you know.
Yeah.
So she was my third wife, you know.
And Carolyn.
Caroline was my second wife, and that was again when Ruling Class, I cast her in that and fell in love with her.
But she was a star at that point, wasn't
Well, she wasn't, particularly in England, in television, you know, and she was very well known and all that. And then my first wife was French, you know,
How did
who
you
I
meet
met
her?
in London because a friend of mine from Paris sent her to me that she was coming here to study English, and it was around 1961 or 62, you know. We were together in London, and that's when I went on the contract to Universal. I went to Los Angeles and I was working there, and then she came out to LA, and then we got married, and my older son Christopher was born in Los Angeles, and a few 2-3 years later we came back to London, and then I was working at Pinewood. And
I know, and you have a fabulous picture where you were chased down the road with paparazzi. The whole of the film world has changed dramatically in...
It's so meaningless. It's just a drum up publicity to sell the newspapers and all that. And all the movie stars are made into this mystical, incredible people, you know, which they are, because most of them are brilliant actors. But I mean, in my days when I was at Universal in 63, 64, 65, I left my car in a parking spot at Universal because I was late from the stage, and then I get this phone call. Are you Peter Medak? You drive a red and white DeSoto? And I said, yes, you know. He said, you mind coming to Bungalow 3, you know, and there were bungalows those days at Universal. And I go in there and I knock on the door, and the secretary said, Mr. Medak. I said, yes, do you mind going in? And I go in and I open the door. It's Cary Grant. And Cary is sitting behind his desk. He just came off the stage. He was shooting something with Leslie Caron at the time. And he said, these were his words, I never forgotten. He said, I'm curious. He said, why did you park in Dorothy Stein's parking spot? And Dorothy Stein was the sister of Jules Stein, who owned MCA in the world, Music Corporation of America, who owned the studio, you know. And he said, have you seen your car? And I said, no. He said, but we got a bit of a problem because I backed my Bentley into your car. And he said, my Bentley is okay, but your car isn't. And I don't want you to, I want you to take the car to the corner. There's a garage on Lancashire and Ventura Boulevard, which is still there today. And just tell me how much it is, and I'll give you the money. Don't, because your car is not worth anything, but my car, you know, the insurance is gonna be a nightmare, you know. So in his room, there were all this memorabilia, and on the wall there was this bicycle. And I said, what is that bicycle? And he said, that's the bicycle I rode in my circus act when I came to America for the first time.
Fantastic song.
He said, but where are you from? And he said, I'm English. And he broke up laughing. He stood up. He said, you English? He said, I am English. He said, my mom lives in Bristol, you know.
Well, you don't sound English. So
well, of course not, you know, but in my mind, no, in my mind I'm English. When I got the Evening Standard Award for the Craze,
I'm English.
Richard Attenborough and John Mills gave me the thing, and they made this speech about Hungarians coming to this country, and Alexander Korda and Joel Schulte and this and that. And then I had to make my acceptance speech, you know, and everybody is there in the business, you know. I looked them all, and there were some of them friends like Jeremy Thomas and people like that who were assistants together, and I made this speech saying I love this country so much, which is true. And he said, I'm more English than all of you put together. And there was this shocked silence, saying he's gone finally completely insane, you know.
But you say you're English, but you live in Los Angeles.
Well, I live in Los Angeles, regretfully, you know, but in my soul, you know.
But you love Los Angeles. You know, you've got the fabulous house, which includes... Yeah. I wanted to ask you something about Pinocchio. Why do you love Pinocchio?
Well, no, I did a version of Pinocchio for television with... P.V. Herman, who played Pinocchio, and that little thing is P.V. Herman as Pinocchio. So I got that off the film.
I wondered
I always take something of the film.
I just wanted to know if it was because you like lies or are you interested?
No. It was wonderful because in that Pinocchio was Carl Reiner, who played Geppetto, Jimmy Coburn, you know.
He should explain. He's got Pinocchio in his drawing room with a big, huge nose. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's because I live alone, you know, and he's always there.
And Pinocchio's reading.
If I'm pissed off, I turn his head down and it's like that.
No, but you also get him to read.
Yeah, no, he's got
very eccentric.
He's got a couple of plays always in his thing. I don't know. I mean, it's
just move it around.
I love collecting things. And Romeo's Bleeding, when you come into my house, because Gary, at the end of the movie, Lena Olin comes in and the door opens and he's singing in slow motion, and there's this bell ringing, you know, and I stole that bell off the set and it's on my front door.
You are a thief.
So every time, of course, you know, but always just little things.
Yes.
And when Gary first came to see me at this apartment after we got the divorce from Julia, he came through the door and he suddenly went like, fucking hell, it's the bell.
And what are you going to do when you live in when you first came to Hollywood? Where did you actually live?
In Larrabee.
But it must have been incredible in the early 60s.
Oh, it was fantastic. The very first thing, when I got to Universal, they realized that I wasn't English. I mean, they had to be thinking I'm crazy I'm English. That I was stateless still, because I became British at Milshire Boulevard at the consulate. It took about 3 months or 4 months to get my green card. And Sid Sheinberg, who ended up running the studio, was a wonderful young lawyer at the television department. And he said to me, he said, we got a bit of a problem because the project you came on here fell through. This is after 2 weeks of having got here. And he said, we want you to go back to London and we'll pay you for the year and then we'll see what happens next year in the option. And so I said to Sydney, I said, I can't go back to England. I mean, I signed a 7-year contract and after 2 weeks you tell me, you know, to get on the plane, go back. So I said, let me talk to the guys, you know. Then he came back and he said, okay, we're going to get your green card. It's going to take a while, but meanwhile, we want you to go and observe the various productions. Tomorrow, go on stage and report to Mr. Hitchcock. So I walk on the set and I'm with Alfred Hitchcock for about a month and a half, watching him direct Marnie.
I love Marnie.
With Tippi Hedren.
Yes, Tippi Hedren's incredible.
And Sean Connery. And Sean comes on the set and he sees me. I mean, I knew him as an assistant director. And he says to me, hey lad, what the fuck are you doing here? And I said, I'm going to be a director, Sean, you know. And so it was a fantastic time. I mean, for this kid from nowhere to be at the studio and know Mr. Hitchcock, you know, used to come in the morning, you know, he's driven in, and it was unbelievable. It was luck. When I look back, I mean, I escaped in 1956 to London, you know, and 1963, 7 years later,
you're working with
I'm
Hitchcock.
under contract to Universal.
That's incredible.
So when you come when you have nothing, but you see out through the crack of the window what something wonderful is, it teaches you what you want, what you can have, what you could have, you know.
Getting back to your film that you've just made at the age of 80, it's your 80th year, and you better win a prize at the Oscars. And how do you feel after having edited this whole...
Well, I mean, the fantastic thing about it is that originally Gary knew everything about this film, because anybody I really worked with who knew each other heard about this fucking disaster with Peter Sellers, which I did, Ghost in the Noonday Sun. So Gary knew about it, and one day he said we should make a film about the making of that movie, but a proper movie, not a documentary.
Yeah.
He said, but I don't want to play Peter Sellers, I want to play you. And we got somebody to play Peter Sellers, you know, so we never did it. We had a script written on it by a friend of Gary here in London, and it never went anywhere. And I get this message to the Academy saying somebody from Cyprus is desperate to get in touch with you, will you email him? And there was this producer in Cyprus out of the blue, and he said he wants to make a film about Ghost in the Noonday Sun, a documentary of what happened, because it was the most important thing which was shot in Cyprus. And I said, it is the last thing I want to do in my life, and to go back into this nightmare, and I don't want to know. And then I thought about it for a week or two, and I said, you're crazy, because actually you could make a film about tell the story of what happened, and about the 70s of London and King's Road and this and that. And
I thought you did that very well, actually.
Wasn't that?
Yeah, I really loved the way that you brought back the past and put it in. It was very actually romantic, and I love the footage you found of Peter Sellers driving up and down the King's Road.
Rolls,
it makes everything look so glamorous, but and today so shitty.
But I did, you know. So the thing was this. So that's how it came about. But I was going to do Death Wish after ruling class, and I wanted Henry Fonda to play the Charles Bronson part. Bronson what didn't exist at the time. And United Artists wouldn't let me have him. And I got so pissed off, actually, not upset,
that
I quit, you know, and I quit. I quit from more movies than I made, actually. And I went back to London, and that weekend I bumped into Peter Sellers at that same spot where he's driving his car, except he was walking in front of Alvaro's restaurant. And he said, Dennis told me you walked out of your movie from UA. He said, come and do my movie, you know, the Ghost, you know, 70, whatever. And I said yes, and that's how the whole thing came about.
I love the way that you got out there and the boat sunk.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, it's an amazing film that encapsulates the time, actually. It's also got the ridiculous nature of all the goons in a way in it, and I love the way that you entered the film sitting next door to Spike, cleaning up his chair in the park. And I love that.
But the incredible thing about it, I've never done a documentary ever in my life. It is the greatest form of making movies. It's better than actually making movies.
You said it was better than therapy.
But it is, because it's a completely free form, and there was not one word of it written. Everything, it came from nothing. And I wanted to, because I went to the cemetery, which is not in the film, except me walking down in the Jewish cemetery where Peter was cremated. And I said, I've got to go to Spike, because the commercial which I made, that Benson Hedges commercial, Spike donated that money to Finchley Park, you know, where his statue is. So when I turned up that morning, I had no idea what we were going to do, you know, and I asked Terry Gilliam to come there because they were inspired by all the Goon shows, you know, but Terry was busy, he couldn't, and all that.
Anyway, it's not about Terry. It's really about Peter Sellers, the Goons, you, the mess, and the nightmare of when a script isn't absolutely perfect.
Absolutely. And John Heyman.
It was actually a lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. But John Heyman's interview, there's only a minuscule part of it is an absolute historical lesson about film financing in England in 1970s, when he financed about 180 movies. And
you would never think he was going to die. He looked incredible.
No, I know, and it kills me every time. He said, why, you know, everybody's so worked, why are you upset about this after? You must be crazy.
He actually gave you a bit of a lecture.
No,
he sort of said, and next time, it was sort of a bit like this, next time you'll have a proper script, because otherwise you don't make a film unless the script is 100%. And what I loved was your line, which said, but I had a wife, and she was about to have a baby.
I had to. No, there was no way of walking out. I mean, we were all locked into this incredible thing which you couldn't get off the train. But I mean, as John says, he said it wasn't you, it was, we should never have made the film, I should have never financed it, Peter should have never paid it. He said none of us should have done this because it wasn't ready, it wasn't good enough and all that. And I love it when he says you really have to have a hard-on, and he goes like that, an erection to want to do something. And he's right, but the tragedy was I made the 3 perfect movie for myself, which was negative.
It's incredible.
I wish I would be shooting it today still. A Day in the Death of Joe Egg was a huge, enormous play by Peter Nichols, which Albert Finney bought and owned. And somehow I ended up directing the movie, and I was asked by Columbia, you know. And then Ruling Class happened.
Ruling Class.
You know. And then I was going to do Death Wish, which I then walked out, and then I walked into this disaster with Peter.
And you lost confidence from it, do you think?
Well, I know. I mean, it really shook me, because I felt responsible for his failure, which I say in the movie, you know. And it was an incredible period of movies and people, and I, you know, I say that, you know, that both Spike and Peter were certifiably insane, but in a most divine way.
Well, out of ordinary people you get ordinary things, and out of extraordinary people you get extraordinary things.
But I said on it, it's not in the film, that I still love them both despite of it, which makes me more insane than the 2 of them put together, which is true. You know, because everybody would have just run from them and tried to forget the whole thing, but you can't. because they were really, I mean, Peter was a fucking genius.